Joe Louis knocked out 26 men in title fights. 26. He held the heavyweight championship for 12 years, the longest reign in boxing history. He hit so hard that men who fought him described the experience not as pain, but as a kind of electrical event, like being struck by something that did not follow the ordinary rules of physics. Joe Louis had seen every kind of power a human body could produce. He had felt it. He had delivered it. And on a Tuesday afternoon in a gym in Los Angeles, a man who weighed 135 pounds hit a heavy bag in front of him. One strike. Joe Louis sat down. He did not speak for 10 minutes. When he finally opened his mouth, he said 5 words that he would never repeat publicly and that the 2 men standing beside him would carry for the rest of their lives. This is the story of what happened in that gym, and why a man who had been hit by the hardest punchers on the planet was shaken by someone who had never boxed a single professional round. To understand this story, you have to understand what Joe Louis's life looked like by the late 1960s. And this part is not easy to tell, because by the late 1960s, Joe Louis was not the man the world remembered. The champion, the hero, the brown bomber who had knocked out Max Schmeling in 1 round in 1938 and given an entire nation, an entire race, something to stand on during the darkest years of segregation. That man was gone. Or rather, that man was buried under something. Joe Louis had retired in 1951. He had come back briefly, been beaten badly by Rocky Marciano, and retired for good. And then the years that followed had been unkind in ways that most people never talk about. The IRS came after him. They said he owed more than $1 million in back taxes. Not because he had hidden money he hadn't, but because during the war he had donated his entire purse from 2 title fights to Army and Navy relief funds. The government accepted the donations. Then they taxed him on the money he had given away. Read that again. They taxed him on money he had donated to the United States military during wartime. The debt grew. Interest compounded. Joe Louis, a man who had earned millions, was broke. He tried to earn money wherever he could. Wrestling exhibitions. Refereeing.
Celebrity appearances.
He became a greeter at a casino in Las Vegas, the great champion of the world standing by the door in a suit, shaking hands with tourists. He developed health problems. His heart. His mind. He began to struggle with things that had always been easy. His speech slowed. His memory faded at the edges. By the time this story takes place, Joe Louis was a man carrying the kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than the body. The exhaustion of a man who had given everything, literally everything, and had been repaid with a tax bill and a job greeting strangers at a door. He was still Joe Louis. He still carried himself with dignity. But something behind his eyes had dimmed. And the only people who could see it were the people who had known him when it was bright. The gym belonged to a man named Ed Parker. If you know martial arts history, you know that name. Ed Parker was one of the fathers of American karate. He ran a studio in Los Angeles that attracted an extraordinary range of people. Actors, athletes, military officers, musicians. Anyone who wanted to learn to fight eventually ended up at Ed Parker's door. Bruce Lee trained there sometimes. Not regularly, Bruce Lee was not a regular anywhere, but he knew Parker well and respected him. Joe Louis visited Parker's gym from time to time. By 1968, he was living in Los Angeles, and the gym was one of the few places where people treated him the way he deserved to be treated. Not as a relic. Not as a former champion. As the man. Parker had been trying to get Bruce Lee and Joe Louis in the same room for months. Not because he wanted a spectacle. Because he believed Parker was a perceptive man. A man who understood the subtleties of physical power the way a pianist understands the subtleties of touch. That these 2 men had something to learn from each other. Bruce Lee did not need convincing. He had studied film of Joe Louis's fights extensively. He had told Parker on more than one occasion that Louis's right hand was, from a purely mechanical standpoint, one of the most efficient weapons a human body had ever produced. Not the fastest. Not the flashiest. The most efficient. Coming from Bruce Lee, a man who worshipped efficiency the way other men worship gods. That was the highest possible compliment. Joe Louis, for his part, had no idea who Bruce Lee was. He knew there was a young martial artist that Parker kept talking about. He had no particular interest in martial arts. He had spent his life in a world where what mattered was what happened between the ropes, with gloves on, under the lights. He agreed to come to the gym on a Tuesday afternoon. He expected a brief visit. Shake some hands. Watch a demonstration. Leave. He had no idea he was about to see something that would rearrange the deepest foundation of everything he believed about the human body and force. If you love Bruce Lee stories, subscribe. I post rare stories every day. Bruce Lee arrived wearing a plain white t-shirt and dark pants. Joe Louis was already there, sitting on a folding chair near the heavy bags, talking quietly with Parker about boxing. The old fights, the old days, the world that Louis carried with him everywhere like a photograph he could not stop looking at. When Bruce Lee walked in, Louis glanced up, and then glanced back down. Not rudely, not dismissively, just the automatic reaction of a man who had met 10,000 people over the course of his career and had learned to sort them quickly. A small man, young, not a boxer, not relevant to the world as Joe Louis understood it. Parker made introductions. Bruce Lee shook Louis's hand. He was respectful, deeply respectful. He told Louis that he had studied his fights, that the Schmeling rematch was, in his view, the most perfect expression of controlled aggression in the history of combat sports. Louis appreciated that. He said thank you. He settled back into his chair. And for about 20 minutes, things were easy, comfortable. Bruce Lee demonstrated some basic techniques. Kicks, hand traps, the centerline theory that was at the heart of his approach. Louis watched politely, the way a master chef watches someone cook on a camping stove. Interested enough, not threatened, not engaged at a deep level. Then Parker suggested something. He said, "Bruce, show Joe the bag work." Bruce Lee looked at the heavy bag. Then he looked at Joe Louis. Something shifted in the room. "Now, I need you to understand something about heavy bags. A heavy bag is the most honest piece of equipment in any gym. You cannot fake a heavy bag. When you hit a heavy bag, the bag tells the truth about exactly how much force you produced. The swing, the sound, the depth of the impact, the difference between a strike that moves the surface and a strike that moves the bag from the inside." Joe Louis knew heavy bags the way a sailor knows the ocean. He had spent thousands of hours in front of them. He knew what power looked like from the outside and felt like from the inside. He believed, with the quiet certainty of a man who had tested this belief against every opponent on Earth, that power came from size and weight and leverage and timing. Mass times velocity. The bigger the mass, the bigger the force. That was the law. A man who weighs 200 pounds hits harder than a man who weighs 135. Always, without exception. That was the law Joe Louis carried into that gym. And Bruce Lee was about to break it. Bruce Lee walked to the heavy bag. He stood very close to it. Closer than a boxer would stand. His front hand was almost touching the surface of the bag. He did not take a stance that Joe Louis recognized. He did not set his feet the way a boxer sets his feet. He did not load his weight the way a fighter loads weight before a big shot. He just stood there, still. His hands relaxed at his sides, his breathing even, his face completely calm. Joe Louis watched with the patient, slightly bored expression of a man waiting for something he has seen 1,000 times before. Then Bruce Lee hit the bag. There was no wind-up, no step, no rotation that the eye could follow, no telegraph of any kind. One moment he was standing still. The next moment the bag was moving. And the way the bag moved is the thing that changed everything. It did not swing. Heavy bags swing when you hit them with a pushing force, when the energy enters the bag and moves through it horizontally, sending the bag backward on its chain in a pendulum motion. This bag did not swing. It jumped. The impact was so concentrated, so instantaneous, so fundamentally different from anything produced by a pushing force that the bag reacted vertically. It leapt upward off its axis, the chain snapped taut, and the entire frame shuddered. The sound was wrong too. Not the deep, dull thud of a heavy punch. A crack. Short. Sharp. Like a bullwhip. The bag settled. The gym was silent. Bruce Lee stepped back. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. Joe Louis sat down. Not the way a tired man sits down. The way a man whose understanding of something fundamental has just been rearranged sits down. Slowly, carefully, like the chair might not hold him. Like the floor underneath the chair might not hold the chair. He did not speak. Parker looked at Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee looked at Parker. Neither of them said anything either, because they both understood what had just happened. A man weighing 135 pounds, 65 pounds lighter than Joe Louis in his prime, had just produced an impact on a heavy bag that was not merely comparable to a heavyweight's punch. It was categorically different. Came from a different place. It traveled through a different mechanism. It arrived at a different speed. And it violated the fundamental law that Joe Louis had built his entire career around. He had found a way to generate force not from mass but from the complete, instantaneous coordination of every muscle in the body firing at the same time, through the same line, in a window of time so small that the energy had nowhere to dissipate.
No wasted motion.
No energy leaking sideways. No lag between intention and action. Just a body becoming, for one fraction of a second, a single unified instrument of force. Joe Louis had never seen that before. Not refined to this degree. Not stripped of everything unnecessary until only the pure mechanism remained. That is what Joe Louis was sitting with. In silence. For 10 minutes. If you love Bruce Lee stories, subscribe. I post rare stories every day. When Joe Louis finally spoke, his voice was very quiet. He said 5 words. Parker would repeat them later to close friends. Bruce Lee mentioned them once in a private conversation years afterward. But neither man ever said them publicly, because both of them understood that what Louis had said was not meant for the public. It was meant for that room, for that moment, for the 3 men who were there. Joe Louis looked at Bruce Lee. He looked at the heavy bag, still swaying slightly. He looked down at his own hands, the hands that had ended 26 title fights, the hands that had knocked out Max Schmeling in 124 seconds, the hands that an entire nation had believed were the most powerful weapons any man had ever carried. And he said, I was doing it wrong. 5 words. From the greatest heavyweight champion who ever lived. Said not with bitterness. Not with jealousy. Not with any of the defensiveness that most men would feel watching someone smaller do something they believed only they could do. Said with something much rarer than any of that. Said with wonder. The wonder of a man who, at the end of a long and brutal career, after everything he had given and everything that had been taken from him, had just been shown that the thing he loved, the science of hitting, the physics of the human body as an instrument of force, was even deeper and more beautiful than he had known. He was not doing it wrong. Nobody needs to hear that. Joe Louis was one of the greatest punchers who ever drew breath. But what he meant, what he was really saying, was something that Bruce Lee had spent his entire life trying to teach the world. There is always another level. There is always something deeper. There is always a way to strip one more unnecessary thing away and get closer to the pure center of what you are trying to do. Even if you are the best in the world. Even if you have spent your whole life doing it. Even if everyone around you has told you there is nothing left to learn. There is always another level. And Bruce Lee, standing in a gym in a white t-shirt, 135 pounds, no title, no belt, no record, no ring, had just shown the greatest heavyweight champion in history what the next level looked like. Here is what stays with me about this story. Joe Louis did not have to sit down. He did not have to go quiet. He did not have to say those 5 words. He could have done what most champions would have done. Nodded politely. Said something complimentary but distant. Protected the territory of his expertise. Gone home with his understanding of the world intact. He chose not to. He chose instead to be honest. At the lowest point of his life. Broke. Tired. His body and mind beginning the slow decline that would define his final years. He chose to look at a man who was 65 pounds lighter than him and say, "You just showed me something I didn't know." That takes a kind of courage that has nothing to do with fighting. It requires you to let go of the one thing you have left, the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you know. Joe Louis let go of it. In a gym in Los Angeles. On a Tuesday afternoon. And in doing so, He showed Bruce Lee something that Bruce Lee already believed but had rarely seen proven. That the truly great are not the ones who protect what they know. The truly great are the ones who are still willing to be stunned. Bruce Lee was 32 when he died. Joe Louis was 66 when he died. Neither man ever spoke publicly about that afternoon. But the heavy bag knew. And the two men who were standing there knew. And the silence that filled that gym for 10 minutes knew. Some things do not need an audience. Some things are only true when they happen in a room with 3 people and a heavy bag and no cameras. That was the afternoon. That was the lesson. Not the punch. The silence after it.